Okay, for today's lesson, you're going to listen to a video since I am out of the building for a meeting. Go ahead and write down these first two problems for your do now and work them through all the way before unpausing the video, because I will just go through the correct way to do them, but make sure to try them first in your notebook or on your desk is fine. Looking at these, you have to always start with a GCF. If I look at these two terms, the greatest common factor of 4 and 4 is 4. Here I have an x to the fourth and an x cubed. It is always going to be your least number of variables, so x cubed is the rest of my GCF. Inside the parentheses, you're dividing this out, so 4 divided by 4 is 1. X to the fourth, and you remove 3 x's, and you get just 1 x left inside. When you find what's pulled out of the back part, 4 divided by 4 is 1, x cubed divided by x cubed is 1, so you just need this placeholder variable 1 at the back. That is finished, because in your parentheses you no longer have a squared or anything else going on. There's nothing you can factor at the back. Looking at number 2, again the first thing to try is your GCF. What I immediately notice is all of these are even, so I'm going to divide a 2 out of everything. It's going to leave you with 5b squared minus 37b minus 72. And then you can go ahead and factor diamond. Since there is a 5 in front of the b, you're going to multiply it by the negative 72 and you get negative 360. At the bottom you get your negative 37. Remember, while you do this, you're ignoring your GCF because you already factored it out. Listing out factor pairs of 360, you can list whatever you want. We know, like, for example, 1 times 360. If you look at what you multiplied to get that, you have 5 times 72. When you play around with your numbers enough, you should eventually get an 8 times 45. 8 and 45 is your correct answer. So I'm going to fill them in. To figure out my signs, this 45 here needs to be negative, so 8 minus 45 is negative 37. 8 times negative 45 is negative 360. This is where you then have to divide that 5 right back out of your problem. Negative 45 divided by 5 is a negative 9. This does not simplify or divide, so that's finished. When I fill this in my parentheses, I'm going to have b minus 9, and I'm going to have 5b plus 8. Do not forget your GCF, so I'm going to bring down that 2 right there, and that is my final answer to that problem. We're going to go over your homework answers next time. For now, you're just going to turn them in so that I can stamp them and give them back to you next class. So make sure we collect those now. This is your title for today. Today we are going to start simplifying rational expressions. This entire unit is about rational expressions. A rational is a fraction. So everything we do is going to be different operations with fractions. Every time that I talk about a new operation, we're going to talk about what you do if it's just a normal fraction, and then how we apply that here. This expressions part tells you that there's going to be variables involved, that you're going to have addition, subtraction, multiplication, addition, whatever, inside of your fraction. Today we are just going to simplify them. When you simplify fractions, like I said, every single time I'm going to go back to how you simplify it in the normal fractions that you guys are dealing with. For example, if I pick an easy one, 2 over 4. To simplify it, you figure out your common factors. You guys do this in your head for the most part. I'm going to show you technically the long way that you were taught way back when. 2 over 4, you're figuring out a common factor. So if I factor the top, 2 is just 1 times 2, and there's nothing that goes into that. If you write out the factors of the bottom, 4 is 2 times 2. What this lets you do is cross off the 2's, and you're left just 1 over 2. Now again, you guys don't do that anymore most of the time because you know most of your factors. But this works the same way for bigger numbers. Say if I did 18 over, let's go with 39. Writing out all of the factors of 18. 18 is 9 times 2, and 9 is 3 times 3. So I'm factor treating that 18 basically if you're trying to figure out what's happening. 9 times 2, 3 times 3, so 2 times 3 times 3. Again, this is the long way that nobody does anymore because you do it in your head. 39 is just 3 times 13, and you can't break that down anymore, so I fill those in. Then, when you simplify a fraction, technically you're just crossing those off. This then becomes 6 over 13, which is the simplified version of the fraction. Please note that in order to cross anything off ever, it has to be multiplied. So we are going to turn our expressions, as I'm about to show you, into multiplication like we did here. Okay, because today you're going to do rational expressions, which are a little more complicated. Like normal, let's see, I'm going to split this screen for you and give you some steps. We're going to go through a wide variety of steps that will apply to all the different types. And make sure you have plenty of examples. So remember, usually some of these first steps don't get used every time. Okay, your first step for simplifying rational expressions and finding excluded values, because that is literally what your directions will say every time. Your first step is to factor all parts of your fraction. Okay, because as you think before, everything has to be written as multiplication. Now you can multiply quantities together, so you might have parentheses with addition or subtraction inside, but everything has to be multiplication. When we look at this problem, everything already is multiplication. If you would like to factor tree the 20 and the 40 to simplify that down, you are more than welcome to. But with your monomials, it is not often something you're going to have to do. Okay, then you are going to cross off or divide out your common factors, something that's in the top and the bottom that you can divide out of your problem. When we look at this one, many of you probably already did it. 20 and 40 have a common factor of 20. So 20 divided by 20 gives you just an a over 40 divided by 20 is 2a squared. You also will do the same thing for your variables. We're looking at those a's. One of them we're going to cross off. Leaves you nothing on the top, which we have to have a placeholder of a 1 over 2a. This is your simplified answer. These ones that are monomials, so one term on top of one term, you do just like you do your regular division. The last thing then is finding your excluded values. Your excluded values, oopsies, are any number for x, for your variable, makes the denominator equal 0. Okay, you are not allowed to divide by 0 ever, and it still is important here. So we have to figure out what would make my denominator equal 0. When you do your excluded value, the way you do this, you will set your original denominator equal to 0 and solve for x, just like we did 2 chapters ago. For your x, your variable, whatever it is. So in this one, I'm going to do 40a squared equals 0. Dividing by 40, you get a squared equals 0. When you square root both sides, a cannot equal 0. So your excluded values is when a equals 0, because that would force your denominator to be 0, which is an issue. So the way we write that, you will write your final simplified answer, you put a comma, you tell me that a cannot equal 0. So you put your equal sign with a line through it, because you're telling me this is what it cannot be, because then the denominator will be 0. And that's done. Okay, go ahead and put this one up on the board and then pause it so you have a chance to try it. I'm just going to go through and solve this one on here. When we look at this, you are trying to simplify for the 48 and the 80. If you find a common factor, 8 goes into both, but then you will notice that there's more that goes into both. So don't always just assume that one number goes in. You are welcome to guess and check and just divide things out, but always check if you can go further. What I mean by that, if I divide 8 out of both, that gives me 6m cubed over 10m squared. Always check your answer. There are more common factors. Here the answer is yes. There's a 2 that goes into each of these. So I can pull out a 2, and that gives me 3 and 5. Looking at your variables, I have 2 on bottom and 3 on top, so those 2 will cancel out. I took 2 out of the 3, so I'm just going to have a 3m left over. This is your final answer. You do need excluded values, or you are not done. When we find our excluded values, remember, 80m squared equals 0. Again, it's going to leave me with m squared equals 0, so m, my excluded value is when m equals 0. Again, when you write it over here, just put a comma. M cannot be 0. Done. Trust me that that's not the only way we're going to do them. I'm going to have to actually make you factor sometime. This is where this green step really comes in. Looking at your problem, you might have to factor just the top, just the bottom, or all of it. You are looking for your squared terms. This is where you can use that reference sheet in last class so that you can help yourself out a little bit. If you're using the reference sheet, what you'll notice, this is there's no GCF. This one has 2 terms. You're looking at your top row. This is a difference of squares. So if I factor it by that pattern, it is p minus 7 times p plus 7. There's nothing factorable in the bottom. So this is what it looks like after I factor. Everything is written as multiplication. Yes, I have addition, but as long as I cross off this entire factor, I can do that. To divide out these common factors, what you do is you match up what's the same on top and bottom as long as there's multiplication. Since everything's multiplied right now, I can cross off whatever I want. I have the p plus 7 on top and on bottom, so those will divide out. You will be left with just your p minus 7. So that is your simplified expression. Now you have to find your excluded values. Take your denominator, always just the bottom, set it equal to 0. Solving it, you get p is negative 7. So my excluded value is negative 7. Oopsies. Okay, go ahead and write this one down. We're going to do the same thing again, because this one has an extra little trick to it that I do think is super important and will help you when you're factoring. One thing, I'll just start here on the bottom. Again, always start with your GCF. When I look at the bottom, there is a GCF of 4v, so that 4v goes in front. 4v squared divided by 4v is just 1v. 4v divided by 4v, I'm left with just a 1. On the top, this is not normally what our problems look like, so it is something we're going to have to start thinking about how we can rewrite what we're looking at. I always like to write it so that my variables go in order. So my biggest variable, then my next one, then my constants are last. So if I'm going to rewrite this, I'm going to rewrite it as negative v, because I have to take the sign with it, plus 1. So I'm just rewriting it so it goes from biggest exponent to smallest. Looking at this right here, this is very similar to the bottom, but it's not exactly the same. What we have to figure out is if we can make it the same. And if you notice, these signs are just opposite of these two. To fix that, you can factor out a negative 1. Negative v divided by negative 1 is positive v. Positive 1 divided by negative 1 is negative 1. Then on the bottom, I still have 4v times v minus 1. And now I have common factors, because everything's multiplied, that I can cross off. So your final simplified answer is a negative 1 over 4v. For your excluded values, remember you have to go from your original denominator before you cross things off, but it may be helpful just to use your factored version also. That is totally fair. 4v times v minus 1 equals 0. To solve this, you're using your zero product property. If these two things multiply to equal 0, then one of them has to be 0. So 4v equals 0, 4v minus 1 equals 0. This is going to give me two excluded values, one of v equals 0 and one of v equals 1. That is fine. When you write that, you can just do v does not equal 0, 1. Okay, go ahead and write this one down and try it. Again, you might have to suddenly start factoring all of the parts of your fraction. Feel free to pause this video so you have a chance to try it. Now you've tried it, we're going to go ahead and factor. On top, we can factor out a GCF of, let's see, looks like 10x. You're going to have an x minus 4 left inside. On the bottom, you cannot divide out a 10, but you can divide out a 5x. Then inside, you're going to have an x plus 8. Looking now to cancel things out, we have a couple common factors. X over x goes away completely. 10 divided by 5, I can cross that off. I will have a 2 left over on top. You cannot cancel these out. Do not try to cancel anything within the parentheses unless everything matches. So your final factored answer is going to be 2 times x minus 4 over x plus 8. You can distribute that 2 through or not based on what we're going to do in the future. I would just leave it alone for now. Sometimes it'll be helpful, sometimes it won't. And I'm a fan of work smarter, not harder. Now to find your excluded values, we're going to set each of our factors on bottom equal to 0, just like we did before. I'm just skipping the step where you write the whole thing equals 0 because you know that this was what comes next. This will give you an excluded value of 0, and this one of -8 because that's what would force your denominator to be 0, and that's an issue. So there's the final answer to your problem. Okay, go ahead and try this one. Same thing as before. Write it down first and try it. Now that you've had a chance to try it, let's go ahead and factor this problem. On top, you are going to have to factor diamond. That is fair game. If there's 3 terms, you probably have to factor diamond. We have a 20 on top, -9 on bottom. Once you factor it, because you already should have, -5 and -4 are your answer. So the top is going to be x minus 5 times x minus 4. It is okay if you factor the different parts differently. Looking at the bottom, we're going to just start by GCF factoring. So I have a 4 and a 16, which means I can pull out a 4. You have x cubed and x squared, so that's an x squared that comes out. Then you're going to have x minus 4 in your parentheses. Looking for common factors, we can cross off these x minus 4s. Nothing else factors out. You can't cross these x's off because this is in the quantity in there, and that's not multiplication there. So we have x minus 5 over 4x squared. To find your excluded values, just like before, set your bottom factors equal to 0. 4x squared equals 0 is going to give me x equals 0. X minus 4 equals 0 is going to give you x equals 4. So x cannot be 0 or 4. Remember to always go from your original denominator, not after you factored it out, because this was still in the denominator, especially when you started. It affects the problem. Sorry, messed up the screen. Let's go over here. Okay, again, go ahead and write this down and give it a try before continuing with the video. When you factor the top, you are going to factor diamond that. There's no GCF, so you can go straight into it. -60 and -4. You should have already tried these, but your factor pair is going to be 10 and 6. To figure out your signs, the 10 needs to be negative in order to get to a -4. So we're going to have v minus 10 times v plus 6. On the bottom, you're going to factor diamond as well, but if you look, you can actually GCF something there first. You can pull out a 3v. When you do that, you're going to have v squared, 42 divided by 3 is 14. 144 divided by 3 is going to be 48. Always factor if you can, it's going to make your job easier. Now when we factor diamond, we ignore the 3b. So multiplying to 48 and adding to 14, let's see, that can be 48 factors of that. 48 divided by 12. You get close when you try 12 and 4, which means you got to try some numbers around that somewhere. If you keep trying numbers around 12, what you end up finding is that 8 and 6 work. Remember, a lot of this is just guess and check. Try it until you find it. So 8 and 6 are my pair. I'm going to go ahead and write it all together. I need the 3v in front. Then I have v plus 8 and v plus 6. Looking for common factors, I have one right there that I can cross off. And skip down a little bit so I have space. So I have v minus 10 on top. On bottom I have 3v times v plus 8. To find your excluded values, again I'm going to set everything in the original denominator equal to 0. 3v equals 0 gives me an excluded value of 0. V plus 8 equals 0 gives me excluded value of -8. And v plus 6 equals 0 gives me an excluded value of -6. You will begin to do those in your head, just like on here, and that is fine. But if you need to write all the work, that is also perfect. We'll do one more. Go ahead and write this one down and start by factoring it. Looking on top, Let's start to GCF that problem first. Down, so I got some space. I can pull a 3x out of all of those terms, not b, whoopsies. So this is an x squared minus 11x, 72 divided by 3 is going to be 24. Now we can factor diamond just that inside part. 24 on top, negative 11 on bottom. You can multiply to 24 a lot of different ways. 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6. The option that's going to work is this 3 times 8, but they both need to be negative to get to a negative 11. But luckily, a negative times negative is a positive, so that's a-okay. When I write it on top, it's going to be 3x times x minus 3 times x minus 8. We're going to factor the bottom the same way. I cannot GCF because there's a 1 in front of that x squared, so I'm just going to do an 18 and a negative 9. Again, if we list out factors, 1 times 18, 2 times 9, 3 times 6. The way to do it is this negative 3 and a negative 6, similar to the one before. When we go ahead and cancel out common factors, since everything's multiplied, you can cancel out anything that matches. X minus 3's cancel, so my final factored answer is 3x times x minus 8 over x minus 6. You can write that in parentheses or not, it doesn't really matter. Your excluded values, you're going to get 1 from doing x minus 3 equals 0, so x cannot be 3. And you're going to do 1 from getting x minus 6 equals 0, so x cannot be 6. I think that is the last example I have in here. Yep. Go ahead and make sure you can pause this video, you can rewind if there are any questions anywhere. The rest of the time you're going to work on your homework. Make sure you simplify every fraction and you give me your excluded values on every single problem.